The Viltrox APS-C 75mm F1.2 lens for the Nikon Z mount. It's a lot cheaper in price than its full-frame Nikon Z F1.2 counterparts, so my question is, for that price, is it any good? Find out next. A quick shout out to the team at Viltrox for sending me out this lens to test and review. But as always, Viltrox aren't paying me to do this review, so any sort of findings or opinions I've got of this lens are mine alone. When it comes to a good portrait lens, what do you look for? Well, there's things like sharpness, bokeh, focus accuracy, they're just to name a few. You're about to see this Viltrox 75mm F1.2 Z mount lens ticks all those boxes and more. I've been reviewing Viltrox lenses for some time now, and one thing has stood out above all else. They keep getting better and better. In a previous video, I reviewed the Viltrox 13mm f1.4 APS-C Z mount lens. My summation on that lens was that it was awesome value for money, and it was a real bokeh beast. This Viltrox 75mm f1.2 lens has taken it a step further with an even wider aperture and more pro-like functionality. But before I get too much into that, let's go and take a look at what you get in the box. Ooh, check out that nice glossy look box cover, very swish indeed. The lens comes well packaged inside and you get your manuals, lens pouch and the lens itself. On the lens, you get a lens hood and both front and rear lens caps. One thing I actually first noticed when I picked up this lens is that it has a little bit of weight to it, and I guess that really has to be expected being an f1.2. On the rear of the lens, you have a USB-C port for future firmware updates. The lens has 16 elements in 11 groups, 4 high refractive index lenses, weighs 670 grams, has a common 77mm filter thread, and has an aperture range of f1.2 to f16. Minimum focusing distance is 88 centimeters or approximately 34.5 inches. The manual aperture ring on the outside I do find comes in very handy for some photography situations, but you can actually leave this in the auto position and let the camera choose the aperture for you if you wish. A couple of new features on this lens. You now get a LFN button that's just underneath the manual and autofocus button. This is where you can assign a heap of different settings in the menu based on your specific needs. I just leave my LFN button on zoom so I can quickly micro adjust focus manually on anything if I really need to. And on the other side, you've now got an on-off button here as well. When this switch is on the on position, it gives the external aperture ring nice definitive clicks, which also helps minimize accidentally bumping the aperture when taking photos. In the off position, the aperture ring becomes silent and you can adjust smoothly without any clicks. Now this is very helpful for those when you're shooting video and you need to adjust your aperture manually, silently and quickly. Now for the test shots in video and stills, I used this lens on my Nikon 45MP Z7 camera. Now most of you will already know that when you put an APS-C lens onto a Z full frame camera, it crops in onto the sensor about 1.5 times. That's so you don't get that gun barrel type look. Now also what happens is, instead of getting 45MP images, because you've pushed in on the sensor, you end up getting about half that. I think it's something like 19 or 20MP images instead. The focal length ends up going to something like 112mm. That's the 35mm equivalent. The first test I ran was to see how well the lens worked in conjunction with the Z7's eye detect, and happy to report it works just as good, if not better, than the native Z mount lenses I've used. When doing portrait photography, I like to utilize that big light source in the sky as much as I can. I place my subjects with their backs to the sun so I don't get any sort of eye squinting, and it gives a nice backlight glow around their hair and shoulders. I use my reflector board with the gold side out, reflecting the sunlight onto the model's face, which gives a nice warm look. You know, I've got to take my hat off here to Viltrox with this lens because I was getting tack sharp shots even wide open at f1.2. Check out this bee I shot at f1.2 mid-flight buzzing between flowers near the ground. I think portrait, corporate and wedding shooters will love this lens, and I think they'll probably like the price even more. Photographing things like flowers or bouquets, you can get the most sublime bokeh happening in the background. Here's a little montage clip I put together using this lens for video. And again, I think this would be really good for wedding and portrait shooters to take advantage of the shallow depth of field or those low light situations. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the review. Oh, and a special thank you to my model, Christy. And take a bow, Christy, you did really well on that day. Guys, what I've done is I've left you some more information on this Viltrox 75mm F1.2 Z mount lens in the video description box. Never stop creating, and I'll see you next time.